Salutations, beloved, and welcome to another episode of Making a Beautiful Life with me, your host, Eden Valentine. Now, this upload is a little bit late. I am currently filming this during the eclipse. Last time that I did this, my audio came out super funky. So now I'm re-recording this, so that's why this upload is late. Just letting you know. In today's episode, I will be drafting a pattern and making a dress inspired by that classic Disney princess silhouette. Now, I love Disney's interpretation of historical garments because they still maintain feelings of magic, mysticism, and whimsy without looking alien to the modern eye. Now, before we get into this, I need to share a few things with you. I went into this project with so much confidence, and then I remembered that pattern drafting is incredibly math heavy. I have the math skills of a third grader. Math is very obviously not one of my strengths, so my confidence got knocked down a few notches rather quickly. But everything worked out rather well, if I do say so myself, so my confidence is high once more. So if you aren't necessarily good at math, this is not impossible. There's still aspects of it that are still really easy, and if you happen to be more advanced in math than myself, then this should be like a cakewalk. Now, with all that said, this video is covering the absolute basics because the knowledge I have on pattern drafting is absolutely basic. But I'm still able to make beautiful things with my limited knowledge. So, first things first, we need measurements. Now, for this dress, I do plan on wearing a corset, so when I took my measurements, I made sure to have the corset on. I measured my waist, my underbust, my bust, my overbust, and the top of my hips. Then I measured the distances between my overbust, bust, underbust, waist, and top of the hips. And that's really all the information I'm really going to need to make this dress. I start by roughly drawing out my pattern pieces in my notebook. I do this because it helps me to visualize how things are going to fit together. Now, I will say that you should just absolutely ignore the measurements that I am writing down for my pattern pieces in my notebook because those things will change over time. And I would say that this particular step is a lot like accounting, but instead of keeping track of money, you're keeping track of distance, of measurements, of inches. For example, if you have a 36-inch waist, then whenever you take all of your pattern pieces and combine them, they should equal to 36 inches. And just another helpful tip. There is a 7-inch discrepancy between my bust and underbust. So obviously that extra 7 inches isn't coming from my back. It's coming from the front of my body, my breasts. So when I am drafting out my front panels, I need to make sure that I am adding that extra 7 inches up here in the front. Once I finished my notebook drafts, I went to work on my pattern paper. 90% of the time, if I'm going to be drafting a pattern, my center front panel will always be cut on a fold. So I just only have to draft half of that particular pattern piece out. I start by marking my vertical measurements on my pattern paper, and then I add the corresponding horizontal measurements. followed by a little game of connect the dots. This will give me the basic element of what that pattern piece is going to be. Now, I originally wanted to do a rounded princess seam, but that was just not working out. I can't tell you how to make that work. I can't tell you what went wrong or how to fix it. It's just beyond my current skill set. Sometimes you can go into a project with a really specific vision, but once you start working on that project, it kind of will just take on a life of its own. It's like a collaborative experience between the artist and the medium. Yeah, so I pivoted, literally. I will say my second panel is almost always the toughest. It's probably the least straightforward panel. Like, I'm not even good at regular math, and all of a sudden, like, I have to do boob math. And this part of my body is the curviest part of my body, so that just makes it even more difficult. After I finished my first very wonky attempt at my second panel, I went ahead and cut out my first and second panels out of a muslin fabric and just ran that through my machine real quick just to see how the pieces would fit together. And then I pinned the little mock-up to my shirt just to see how things were gonna fit. And this is when I realized that rounded princess seam was just not going to work. That second panel was way off, so I had to put a dart in it. I marked my fabric, cut out some new pieces, and stitched them together. Now, I'm not going to get too deep into the alterations aspect of this because everybody's alterations are going to be different. I may need to let something out, you may need to let something in. Alterations are so personal because everybody's body is unique. So, I'm not getting into that. Now, I think this was my second iteration of that second panel, and it's still very oddly like shaped. Now, this is the final iteration of my second panel, and you know, it just took some time to arrive to this, and I'm going to share with you a little secret. My best suggestion to avoid all the drama, specifically with that second panel, is just to start by drawing a vertical line, marking your vertical measurements, and then adding your horizontal measurements. But here's the kicker, okay? So say you have a horizontal measurement for this pattern piece that's like 7 inches. So then you do 3.5 inches on one side of this particular line, and then do the other 3.5 on the other side of the line. Now, is that necessarily going to be your final pattern piece? No, but it's a great base to start with. Now we get to the last two panels, which are incredibly straightforward. Thank God. I knew that where the top of the dress would fall on my back was roughly 20 inches, so the top of those last two pattern pieces should be roughly 5 inches wide. Now the back of my dress does have a very slight swoop, so for the third panel, one side of that panel is 1 inch higher than the other, creating a nice little slant. And for my fourth pattern piece, it is just straight across. The waist on each of these panels should be roughly 4 inches wide, and the bottom of these panels should once again be roughly 7 inches wide. And it was finally time to construct this dress. For the structural layer, I decided to use a duck canvas because I wanted some nice heft. Now, looking back, I should have added a lot of horsehair and boning to my structural layer, but I thought that the duck canvas would suffice. And I mean, it does, but I just would have liked to have had more structure. I may eventually reopen this dress and add all that stuff later. Who knows? We'll see. For my pattern pieces, I am adding a 1/3 inch seam allowance, but looking back on things, once again, I should have just made it a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I like to add cuts to my corners. It's the only corners I really like to cut. I just find that this really helps with aligning the pattern pieces, because that first and second panel were very finicky to align. Then I marked 1/3 inch deep into my pattern pieces so I could keep things accurate. And I ironed all my seam allowances down and pinned my pieces together. Now let me tell you, my sewing machine really did not like this duck canvas. I rethreaded my machine, I changed my needle, I did all the things you're supposed to do, and it was just having trouble catching stitches. So I also would play around with my needle placement, my tension, and my stitch length. I set my tension to a 9, my needle placement a 2, and my stitch length a 1. Now, I'm pretty blessed in the chest, but I'm not quite that blessed. So I had to grab my handy dandy little seam ripper and take the sides of my front panel in an inch just at the top. After pressing down my seams, I basted down my seam allowances. I just find that this helps to keep things really neat and organized inside of the garment so things aren't flipping about all willy-nilly. Then I made a pattern piece for a circle skirt. I used a circle skirt calculator from, I think it's Mood Fabrics. It's just an online circle skirt calculator. I will link it down below. It was super helpful. My radius for my waist is 6 inches. So I created an anchor point and did a series of 6-inch lines to connect the dots with. I wanted my skirt to be roughly 30 inches, so I tied some twine to the leg of a tripod and a marker to make a large scale protractor. I set the leg on the anchor point and it worked. Now, this particular pattern piece is a quarter of a full circle skirt. This pattern piece will be cut on the fold, so when you cut it out, you will have half a circle skirt. So I needed to cut out 2 panels for a full circle skirt. Math. Now I'm using a poly cotton broadcloth fabric for the lining and external layers of this project. And I'm gonna tell you right now, my machine also hated this fabric. I love this fabric, but my machine, ooh, no. After pinning and cutting out the pattern for the lower half of my lining layer, I pin and sew one seam while leaving the other open. After that, I put my structural and lining layers together, which looked okay, but not great, so I took it apart. And redid it, taking my time this time. This time I put my structural and lining layers good side to good side, and I did my due diligence to make sure that all of my seams were properly aligned. Now, I was in a major need of a break because all of this doing, undoing, redoing, all of the math, my brain was just, it was over it. I needed a break. I needed a fun, nice little cozy project. So I just took some little teardrop crystals, some clear string, and I just hung them up all over the place. I just find that little touches like these can really set the tone in a space, and I'm always trying to create a very magical vibe. But yeah, that project was a really great little reset button for me. Hopefully you can see that the skirt portion, this is the good side of my lining, as well as the bodice portion, that is also the good side of my lining. So when I attach this, I essentially sewed the skirt onto the bodice with the skirt upside down so that they would be good side to good side. And then I just ran that through my machine, and I put quite a few relief cuts so that whenever the dress is inside out, all of my seams are good side seams, just like they are on the outside. And then all of my bad sides are concealed within the many layers of this dress. The 3 layers, well, really 2. But yeah, that's pretty much how I did that. It looked so much better. So for my outer layer, I spliced together the pattern pieces of my bodice and my circle skirt. So I like full length panels because it helps to like make the body look longer and taller. And that's generally what I'm trying to achieve here. Like I'm 5'7", but my proportions make me look short. So once I cut out those pattern pieces, I mark on the inside of the corners 1/3 of an inch deep and make a little cut. Now at the tip of that cut, I end up stitching those points together. Once again, I just find that this really helps with properly aligning all of my pattern pieces. Then I add relief cuts to the seam allowance of the waist. And finally, I assembled all of my layers. But it looked sloppy, so I took it apart. I decided to align and stitch the seams of the lining and structural layers so that they act more like a singular entity instead of just floating around all willy-nilly. Once those 2 layers were properly aligned and stitched together, I just ran the raw edges of the back of the bodice through my sewing machine just to make sure that this doesn't unravel anymore and that Once again, these two layers act as a singular entity. At this point, this is when I realized I wanted to add more structure to my garment, so I added some horsehair braid just into the top of my dress, and I hand stitched that in between my lining and structural layers. In the future, I might take this whole thing apart and just add more horsehair and boning for more structure. And afterwards, I hand stitched my outer layer to my structural and lining layers. I just did a simple spiral stitch so that if I wanted to take things apart in the future, alter, add, etc., it would just be really quick and easy. I hope you can see that stitching, but I used the same color thread as fabric, so might be a little tricky. Now, my hemline was not completely aligned, but I remedied that by taking my circle skirt pattern and tracing out the bottom just to even out the hemline, and I cut away the excess. I chose to do a rolled hem using the width of my index finger as a measurement tool for the width of my hem. I spent like 90 minutes of my life pinning the hem on this dress. And honestly, I should have pinned more because once I ran that hem through my sewing machine, things shifted around and it caused my hem to pucker. So if you're ever working on a project, always go the extra mile, take the extra step. You will be happy you did. The only reason I didn't take the time is because I had a deadline for this video, which I have now missed. So that's great. So I think I'm going to no longer be committing to uploading the first Saturday of every month anymore. I don't want to rush through my projects. After all, this is called making a beautiful life, not living a rushed life. And part of what this series is all about is making beautiful things, and you can't rush that. When you rush that, that's how things become half-assed. That's when you cut corners, and that's when things start to really lose their magic and their quality. And I don't want to do that. That defeats the whole purpose of the series. Not to mention, it feels like chaos. It creates chaos, that rushing. And I'm not trying to create a chaotic life. I'm trying to create a beautiful life. For example, this dress, I have spent 2 months on it, but I really needed more like 2.5 months. These projects are an investment of my money, my energy, and my time, and I just want them to turn out extravagant. So yeah, in the future, I'm just going to take my time to do things properly and upload when I upload. So I hope that you will be okay with that, because it means that things will turn out better and my videos will also be better. Yay, it's a win-win all around. I just You know, it should still be monthly uploads, but it just depends on the project. Just depends on the project. Anyways, rant done. After both hems are sewn, I just give them a little press and the dress is done. It's a really pretty dress. Not quite perfect, but pretty. After all, I am no professional, just a very ambitious individual who isn't afraid of making a few mistakes. After all, mistakes are nothing but a lesson to be learned. You can see the indentations of my chemise, however you want to say it, underneath my dress, which is shocking to me because this dress has 3 layers to it. But that's neither here nor there. I do plan on making a new chemise this summer that is a lot lighter and thinner and doesn't have all that gathering. So that should eliminate the problem when I choose to wear this dress in the future. So now that I've made a dress using draping and a dress using pattern drafting, I think in next month's episode, I should make a dress using a store-bought pattern. I hope to see you there, and I hope you found today's video educational or at least entertaining. And remember, beloved, if you're going to believe in anything at all, you should believe in yourself. Bye.